Morning, Tiffany. How are you?
Morning. How are you doing?
I am doing good. I am doing good. I'm actually really excited to get to talk to you today because you have a very unique background. You're a leader within our organization, and I think your story of how you got where you are is important, unique, and I think there's a lot to pull from it. So again, excited to talk to you. To start off, tell me a little bit about your current position with First, your career with First Students, and just give me a broad overview of that.
Okay. So I'm an area general manager in what we call Central Region. So that's pretty much northern Missouri, Iowa, and Nebraska are the states that I cover. And there's 40 plus customers that I support through there. Um, Started out as a district manager,
Okay.
um, working with John Bildmeyer, and had only 7 locations when I started. And it's just been a wonderful process of getting to know my customers, understanding how I can support their needs and the community needs to make sure that our kids make it to school on time.
Yeah, yeah, and I think anyone that's watching this, if you Google school bus driver shortage, there's not a shortage of articles talking about the impact that that shortage has on communities across the country. So, for those that aren't aware, your job has a constant level of stress to it right now, just managing the that shortage in personnel and then the effects that has both on our client, our customer, and the communities that we all live in and work in. So again, getting this set up, this interview set up, was difficult just because you are pulled in so many different directions, and it happens to be fall, which is when you guys are your busiest, I think. So, how many employees are within your area? So, how many personnel, I guess, fall under your umbrella of management?
I would say probably 300 or
Okay.
so.
Gotcha. And that's a mix of drivers, support staff, the maintenance and technician side of things, and then of course the safety and operations piece of it as well. Does it just kind of cover everything to run an operation?
Yeah, so I'll have to go back a little bit. With maintenance, while we have a ton of corporate support, regional support, the ultimate responsibility falls to the location and therefore operations to make sure that we're hitting all the goals that we need to hit.
Gotcha.
Because no singular staff unit, no single person can do it all
Right.
themselves. We've all got together to meet our goals.
Right.
Um, so I've got oh somewhere over 600 drivers. So it's probably closer to 1,000 employees in total.
Gotcha.
When we talk about maintenance, we've also got safety staff, and goals that we need to meet with them to ensure that we are putting the safest buses on the road that we can, the safest drivers, most competent drivers, and then our location management, and dispatchers and monitors and all of those support
Yeah.
employees.
Gotcha, gotcha. And I want to jump pretty quickly. Again, I know your time's valuable, so I want to make sure we have enough time to really dive into your military career because again, it's unique. It's not a common. I would say it's not a common path of military service. It's a highly respected and even within the military community. So I feel like I'm dragging on mentioning your background, but you're a West Point graduate, and I really want to dive into your experience with that. So I guess to start off, what led you to West Point? Was it something you always wanted to do? Was it a family kind of tradition? Had there been family members that did it, or how did you end up applying and being accepted to West Point?
So I am the first member of my family to go into the military through West Point. But we do have a family history of military service.
Gotcha.
it was something that came available to me through track and field. I was in high school, but honestly, I fell in love with it when I went for a college visit and really wanted to go somewhere where I could explore the concepts of leadership. And um, thinking about West Point was really, I think, the ultimate place that you can kind of go to do that, a proving ground, a practice ground, to becoming a good, solid leader that can do, I think, one of the most important things that anybody can do, which is, spend some time serving your country and protecting and supporting the freedoms that we have here.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, the public kind of perception of West Point is just that, our leaders come from West Point. I mean, if you were to go ask a random person about West Point, I think they would describe it. They would probably say something, generals come from West Point. But I think there's the perception, and which is the reality as well, that it is a college that just churns out the leaders that lead our military. So jumping into your experience at West Point, how much of it was typical college life, or quote unquote typical college life, and how much of it was kind of military, like the regimented kind of military lifestyle we think of? Was it a good combination? What was your experience like at West Point?
So the first year is a lot more regimented than any of the following years. And that's really based around the concept of both servant leadership and not being able to understand or be a good leader if you can't be a good follower.
Right.
So one of the first things we learn is how to be a good follower, how to follow the rules. There's not a lot of direct relationships with how normal colleges experiences can be.
Gotcha.
You're wearing a uniform every day. It's set up much like a high school block system. So you've got classes that you've got to be at every day. There's no skipping classes. Um, you have to earn passes on the weekends. So you can't just go out at night. You can't just go out on the weekends. It's very much almost like a basic training kind of mentality throughout most of your first year there. But as you go through the years, you get more and more freedoms, and there's places to hang out on campus. There's sporting events to go to. There's activities and clubs that you can be a part of, and that's where you kind of get more of the traditional college experience and more freedoms.
Gotcha. And another piece of your military career that I think is important to touch on is, being a female in the military. Obviously, it's not something I can relate to, but within the organization, the Army specifically, maybe Marine Corps, lean very heavy male. West Point, I think I saw, is somewhere around a quarter of their college population, their student population is female. Talk to me a little bit about your experience, in that dynamic within the military, and within at West Point, and when you got into the military as a commissioned officer, if you had any experience that you feel was unique.
I will say that I made some of the best friendships that I've had, and a lot of those are males. And I think what it did the most was taught me to be more confident in myself.
Gotcha.
Because sometimes with male dominated environments, it can be hard to lose your voice. And sometimes you feel like you have to prove yourself more. But I think what it comes down to is just having the confidence in yourself, having the ability to be humble enough to ask the questions and know that everybody has stuff to learn and that you have things to learn every day, and asking the people around you is not in any way detracting from yourself.
Right.
And just having a close knit community and supporting each other, I think is huge. Is having a team and building each other up and being there to support each other through the hard times.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Thank you for that, because obviously a perspective that my 13 years wasn't one that my military experience wasn't through that lens. So I do appreciate that. Another piece of the West Point story, and then we can kind of jump into your time as a commissioned officer. The acceptance rate, I think I looked up, is somewhere in the ballpark of 9%. So, were you, I'm assuming that in high school you were, a good student or above average student in the athletics. Do you think that, did you know of West Point students who maybe were average students and it was athletics that got them in, or was everyone pretty much top of their high school class coming into West Point?
I think there's a lot of people that were at the top of their class. There's people that made it in because they were better at athletics, but you still have to hit the academic minimums. There's no excusing that, regardless of your athletic prowess. And then there's prior service. Soldiers that came in through West Point, and they have to go to an additional year of schooling to kind of get them up to the level of academics they need to be at. But I say that it was hard. It was very difficult for me to make the minimums that I needed to make. And I think at a young age that taught me that you can achieve what you want to achieve, even if it means that you have to put in some extra work.
Yeah.
That sometimes the best things that you have in your life are the ones that you work the hardest for. And so I can't necessarily say I was academically gifted, but I've learned that you can work very hard and get yourself to the levels that you need to be at.
Yeah, and it's funny. So I think the military teaches, well, you learn lessons teaching you that along the way in the military too, that the easy way is number one. It's probably the wrong way, but there's a much more fulfilling feeling at the end when you did it the hard way, or when you went through adversity to get to that point. I can remember graduating basic training. And just a caveat, before joining the military, I was maybe the laziest person I know. I smoked cigarettes. I did all the things I wasn't supposed to be doing. So going into basic training, I was not prepared one bit. But I can remember struggling and struggling and struggling. But when I graduated, there was a sense of, oh, it was all worth it. Like, you know what I mean? It was all worth going through that pain. And I got sick while I was there and all kinds of things. But so I think, yeah. I think that's an important lesson to know, in life in general, is that adversity and that I don't want to do it feeling that you have, if you can push through that, oftentimes there's something good on the other end of that. So again, thank you for that, because I think that's something that someone can take value from. Let's move over, I guess, leaving West Point. At what point do you select your branch that you're going to go into? Are you told, because I think you were in logistics or that side of the house? When does that happen at West Point?
So there's branch night, is what we call it, and we figure out what branch we've been slotted into. There's a choice. It's based around where you sit academically. So, if you're the top of the class, you get the first choice of where you want to go. And it's also based off the needs of the Army. So there's only so many slots available for each branch. That is done your senior year, typically earlier in the school year. So I was logistics. This was back when we picked our main branch. So mine was transportation. And then when I became a captain, I was moved to a logistics branch that can therefore be placed in any one of the, logistics units. Transportation was my first choice. I loved it. I loved it for the fact that it put me on the front lines, because when I went through West Point, females were not allowed in combat branches,
Right.
um, with transportation, with convoys, specifically thinking about Afghanistan.
Yep.
Uh, that was the way that you could get in to the front lines and make those impacts and be attached to the combat units. And that's one, like 9/11 was a huge thing for me in high school. Having gone through that and seeing the initial push into Iraq and into Afghanistan, and it was hugely influential. And while I had already made the decision to go to West Point, by then it really just solidified the meaning behind what my service was going to be.
Yeah.
So that's why I went transportation, is because I wanted to be out there, doing the things that I thought were the most important for our country at the time.
Yeah, it's funny. So I remember watching the shock and awe on CNN in 2003. I think I was in, I don't know, eighth, ninth grade, 10th, ninth grade, something like that. But I can remember watching that and being like, it I knew it shaped. I didn't connect it at that point, but it left such an impact on me that it definitely was something that swayed or changed my path, or ignited that spark that would one day turn into joining the military. And then the transportation piece, I never thought of that being a conscious choice, again, because it's not something I had to consider. But yeah, it's very interesting that you know when you look at the military, you don't think that the transportation the truck drivers are engaged in combat, but the wars we were fighting in, very much so. I think probably on a more frequent basis than some of the combat arms, because it's every day you're driving these routes, and that was one of their main tactics, was to blow up those routes and the vehicles on it. So yeah, that's an interesting to hear that you chose that because you were limited, or you could not go the combat arms side, but that was a way to get you there. Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. So you graduate West Point. You commission as a second lieutenant. Were you a second
Correct.
lieutenant? Okay. Where do you go from there? What's that transition like? Because that's a transition in and of itself. So do they just assign you to your first duty station and off you go? Is that what it's like?
Yeah, there's some choice in it. Again, it's based off of your standing academically, within the branch that you chose, um, and then what's available for the needs of the Army. I do Fort Polk, Louisiana, as my first duty station, so that should even better on my academic standing. Um, so
Yeah.
so I went there, and I was assigned to a unit, 10th Mountain, that was at the time, and they were scheduled for a deployment within, I think, 6 months of me arriving.
Oh,
um so it's intimidating coming out of college, as a very young person, going in to lead your first platoon, with 90% of the people there are older than you,
yeah.
and single one of them have more regular Army experience than you do. It's intimidating, and it's very humbling. And again, I just go back to not being afraid to ask questions, to lean on other people that you may outrank, and just acknowledging like that they have that skill set that you want, and they can be your teacher. um and but I think those experiences have served me so well through my life, because it helped me understand how to build a team. It helped me understand um how to just be, I guess, just be humble enough to ask questions and being willing to learn from other people, because it doesn't matter where you come from, what your job is. Um, you need to be able to ask the questions and learn from every single person around you.
100%. So, and speaking from the enlisted side, I was an NCO when I got out, and I didn't really connect the dots when I was, a private specialist. But once I got put in that leadership position, and especially on the enlisted side, I quickly picked up that there were, and I'm painting with broad brush, and this is very general, but there's really two types of officers, and there's probably two types of enlisted leaders too. But the officers, in my experience, the officers that number one, leaned on their senior enlisted, or leaned on them to be a resource to make their decisions. They would utilize those experienced people to make decisions, and they were out there with their enlisted, the platoon that they were leading or whatever it was. They were out there with them, and they weren't simply pointing from a tower and saying, move this here and do it. Was those officers that were like, hey, they were helping, put a trailer on or the, what is it, the PLS, the HEMITs and all that. So they were out there doing it. Those officers typically, I feel like, saw more success, and their job was probably a little bit easier. It was that kind of your experience, that once maybe once you connected that, the intimidation of your position wasn't as bad as maybe it was coming into it.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head on what I was trying to say. You've got to be able to get in there and get dirty,
Yeah.
And know that no job that you can do is above you or beneath you. Like we're all a team, we're all accomplishing the same mission, and every single job has to get done, whether that's mopping up the floors or loading a PLS or whatever. You've got to be willing everything. And I think that um, any type of leader that you see that's willing to do that and willing to pull their own weight and to step in and help you if you're struggling with something, is the one that you have the most trust in, and that's the one that that makes you want to follow, and want to help and be a part of the team, and go that extra mile for whatever's happening.
Right.
You can't lead from a tower. You can't expect others to do something that you're not going to do yourself.
Yeah, yeah, and I wasn't picking on officers. I've seen NCOs that do the same thing. Once they get pinned with those chevrons, all of a sudden they don't know how to use a broom anymore, or they don't know how to take trash out, and suddenly they're pointing. So it's not an officer thing. I think it's more of a leader thing. That just happens to be the biggest kind of division and types of leaders in the military as enlisted officers. So awesome. So you arrived at that first duty station. You said they're scheduled to deploy within 6 months. Do you go to Afghanistan I guess within that 6 months or 6 months after you graduated college?
Yep, I did.
Okay.
So I spent a year there. One of the things that I think has really come full circle for me with first student is that in the preparation to deploy in Afghanistan, I led our brigade's female engagement team.
Okay.
So I did a lot of patrols, a lot of I wouldn't say combat oriented missions, but they were combat missions. But what it gave me a chance to do was really promote girls' education in Afghanistan, building schools, talking to locals, just kind of trying to make an impact through education, because I've always really thought that the only way a country can really change itself is through educating its children, so that children can then make the best decisions for themselves, their family, community, country, right?
Yeah.
And while I've never been a very skilled teacher, I think I've done well as a logistician, and then finding a company that I can support education here in the United States and make sure our students get to school on time, because sometimes that's their only ride to school.
Yeah.
um has just been phenomenal. And it for me, looking back at it, it started in Afghanistan. It started with supporting their education, trying to get that off the ground, making sure that schools had books, making sure that their walls got repaired, trying to encourage the teachers, and trying to give them better skill sets so that they could do things within their own cultural bounds.
Right.
Um, yeah.
And I would imagine that, and I never deployed to Afghanistan. I would imagine that seeing education, seeing what education or lack thereof could look like, and we're gonna get kicked out of here in 10 minutes because I don't have the professional one, so we'll wrap up. But seeing what that could look like and then coming back, it probably gives you such it's probably a huge motivator, a huge drive to do exactly what you're doing today. And like you said, to ensure that our communities have a way to get to these schools so that these kids can learn, because you've seen the other end of this. You've seen kids that don't go to schools and they don't learn, and what that creates. So again, I hate that we have to cut it short. I apologize. I could go on for 30 more minutes probably. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today. Again, I think your story has so much value in it, because of being a woman in the military. That automatically has its own hurdles. Being a West Point grad, that's a hurdle, or getting into West Point, a hurdle, and then graduating, deploying. You have so many things that I think have probably made you the leader that you are today, and you're obviously successful. So real quick, I think we have a couple more minutes here. What was your transition like out of the military? So did you have the resources you needed? Did you feel prepared? And then, were you able to land a job and utilize skills that you had coming right out of the military?
So my exit from the military was a little bit different. I did get out, and I was a stay-at-home mom for 2 years.
Okay. Which is
I
a job. That's a full-time job. I wouldn't do it. Yeah.
I would say that utilize utilize the corporate recruiters that focus on military service.
Yeah.
They have such a resource with translation. There's a whole nother language that the military uses.
Yeah.
And it's hard to translate that into something that somebody that doesn't have any military service experience understands.
Yep.
And having them help you do that and prep you for interviews is extremely helpful. Hiring our heroes is a great resource. And then there's also like veterans community groups. There's academy groups at practically every city that you could live at, and reaching out to them for that network connection is extremely helpful. I think that there's way too many veterans that are hesitant to use all the support that they have out there, that really just need to do that. Use everything that you have out there. There's no shame in any of it. And then, building those relationships, that's something that you can carry on for, whatever career path you go down to next.
Yeah, it's funny when we're in the military, we are kind of taught to use every tool at your disposal to accomplish the mission. You accomplish the mission at all costs, even if that means reaching out to others and hey, can you help me do this? I need you to do this. But as soon as we get out here, it's like, well, I have to do this on my own. And it's like, no, you don't. You have a whole network of people and organizations that are here to assist in that. So I think networking is huge. We all, whether it's networking within your veteran kind of your close network, or even on LinkedIn, and just finding other veterans at these companies that you want to work for, or other logistics veterans. Where are they going? What kind of companies are they working for? I think that's huge. So Again, I want to thank you. I know you had to shoot this in your car. You're all over the place right now and extremely busy. But thank you for everything you do for students, and also thank you for your service in the Army and everything you did there. So I appreciate it, and I will let you get to the rest of what do we have the next half of this day. Okay.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the conversation and having the time to talk. I think sharing our stories can be really impactful and help
Yeah.
um, help the next veteran that's coming through. And I honestly believe that first student made the transition so much easier for me, and is just a great place to work.
Yeah, and we have we're building a lot right now around our military. I'm going to call it recruiting program, if you will, but both internally and externally. So we're at the early stages, but I do think that there's going to be very cool things coming for first student and how it connects to the military community. So again, these conversations, these stories, I think are instrumental in building awareness of the fact that we have these leaders in our organization already that have, each one of them has a unique, amazing story that we can tap into to, like you said, helps another veteran out there, another transitioning service member. So yeah, thank you for that, for telling your story, just to help that piece too. So awesome.
Well, thanks.
Fantastic. Yeah. Enjoy the rest of your day. And I think I have a couple of your vacancies I'm working on. So hopefully I can get them filled for you soon.
Uh,
All right. Have a good day.
you too.
Bye.
Bye. you.